The CEO discovers the truth. The child he ignored for years is actually his own son. Hello, let's start another beautiful story. Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's go. The 52nd floor of Hayes Industries' Manhattan headquarters offered a view that Jonathan Hayes had earned with 15 years of relentless dedication. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, the city sprawled beneath him like a conquered kingdom, its streets filled with people rushing through their ordinary lives while he orchestrated deals that would reshape their world. Jonathan adjusted his titanium Patek Philippe watch, a reminder of his first billion-dollar deal, and turned back to the holographic display showing the quarterly projections. The numbers were perfect, as always. They had to be. Perfect was the only acceptable standard in Jonathan Hayes' world. Mr. Hayes, his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Your 2 p.m. is here early. Send them in 5 minutes, Jonathan replied, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had become his trademark. He needed these precious moments alone with the numbers, the only language he truly trusted. At 42, Jonathan Hayes had everything society deemed valuable: wealth, power, respect. His name appeared regularly in Fortune and Forbes, usually accompanied by words like visionary and ruthless. The business world watched his every move, and his competitors feared his legendary ability to spot weakness and exploit it without mercy. The glass walls of his office displayed his achievements, awards, accolades, magazine covers, each one a milestone in a carefully plotted journey to the top. But there was one frame, face down in his desk drawer, that he never looked at anymore. His marriage certificate to Emily Carter, now nothing more than a reminder of the one time he'd let emotion cloud his judgment. The intercom buzzed again. Mr. Hayes, there's an urgent situation in the lobby. Jonathan frowned. Handle it. Sir, it's... His assistant hesitated. It's Emily Carter. She insists on seeing you immediately. The name hit him like a physical blow. Emily... 12 years since their divorce, since she'd told him she was pregnant, and he'd made it clear that a child had no place in his 5-year plan. She'd disappeared after that, and he'd convinced himself it was for the best. The company had needed his full attention during those crucial early years. Sir? Jonathan straightened his Italian silk tie, an unconscious gesture of preparing for battle. Send her up. The words came out harder than he intended. The elevator doors opened, and Emily stepped into his office. Time had been kind to her. Her honey-blonde hair was shorter now, her face more refined, but her eyes still held that same fierce determination he'd once fallen in love with. But it was the boy standing beside her that made Jonathan's carefully constructed world tilt on its axis. The boy was 12, maybe 13. His dark hair and sharp features were a mirror image of Jonathan's own childhood photos. But his eyes, those were Emily's eyes, filled with a storm of emotions that Jonathan hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Jonathan, Emily's voice was steady, professional. This is Liam, your son. The word son echoed in the pristine office like a gunshot. Jonathan's hands gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white against the dark wood. The quarterly projections still hovered in the air behind him, suddenly meaningless. You told me, he started, his voice uncharacteristically rough. I told you what you wanted to hear. Emily cut him off. What made it easy for you to focus on building your empire? She placed a protective hand on Liam's shoulder. But now he has questions that only you can answer. Liam stood straight, his chin lifted in a gesture so familiar it made Jonathan's chest tighten. The boy's school uniform bore the crest of Bradford Academy, one of the city's most prestigious private schools. His tie was slightly crooked, and his eyes held years of absence and uncertainty. Why didn't you want me? The question cut through the air, simple and devastating. Jonathan Hayes, the man who could navigate hostile takeovers without breaking a sweat, who could reduce seasoned executives to stammering with a single look, found himself speechless. The perfect life he'd built, The control he'd maintained with such precision began to crumble around the edges. The city continued its endless movement beyond the windows, unaware that in a corner office high above its streets, a man was facing the greatest challenge of his life, not in boardrooms or balance sheets, but in the eyes of a boy who carried his blood and Emily's fierce spirit. The quarterly projections flickered behind him, numbers and graphs casting blue shadows across the floor, while father and son faced each other across a gulf of 12 years and countless unspoken words. The silence in Jonathan's office stretched like a rubber band about to snap. He found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, fidgeting. His fingers drummed against his desk, creating a rhythmic pattern that matched his racing heartbeat. "Mr. Hayes," his assistant's voice through the intercom made everyone jump. "The board members are waiting in the conference room." Jonathan watched Liam's face fall slightly at the reminder of his father's priorities. The boy's disappointment was familiar. It was the same look he'd seen in the mirror countless times when his own father had chosen work over family. "Cancel it," Jonathan said, surprising himself as much as Emily. In 15 years, he had never cancelled a board meeting. "Reschedule for tomorrow morning." Emily's eyebrows rose slightly, but she maintained her composed demeanor. "Liam has a mathematics competition this afternoon. We should go." She turned to leave, but Jonathan stepped forward. "Wait." The word came out more commanding than he intended, the CEO voice he couldn't seem to shake. "What school did you say he attends?" "Bradford Academy," Liam answered before his mother could, his voice carrying a hint of pride. "I'm in the advanced placement program." Jonathan nodded, recognition flickering in his eyes. He had recently approved a substantial donation to Bradford's science department, never knowing his own son walked those halls. The irony wasn't lost on him. "He has your head for numbers," Emily said softly, and for a moment the years seemed to fall away. "And your stubbornness." Liam shifted uncomfortably, clearly uncertain about these comparisons to a man he'd just met. His hands gripped the straps of his backpack, a nervous gesture that made him look younger than his 12 years. "I'd like to—" Jonathan paused, realizing he had no idea how to proceed. In the business world, every move was calculated, every word measured. But here, in this unexpected moment, his carefully crafted playbook was useless. "I'd like to talk more, perhaps after your competition?" "Mom." Liam looked to Emily, his expression a mix of hope and apprehension. Emily studied Jonathan for a long moment, her green eyes searching for something in his face. "There's a coffee shop near Bradford, Carter's Bean. We can meet there at 4. She pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. "My cell number, in case you're delayed by another emergency." The slight emphasis on emergency wasn't lost on Jonathan. How many family events had he missed over the years, citing business emergencies? How many dinners had Emily eaten alone while he worked late into the night? After they left, Jonathan stood at his window, watching as Emily and Liam emerged from the building far below. They walked close together, Emily's hand occasionally touching Liam's shoulder, a gesture of support and protection that made Jonathan's chest tighten with an unfamiliar ache. His reflection in the glass stared back at him, perfectly pressed suit, immaculate tie, not a hair out of place, the image of success. But for the first time in years, he saw something else too, the shadow of his own father, Robert Hayes, whose pursuit of success had left a wake of emotional destruction. Jonathan reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found his father's number. They hadn't spoken in months, their relationship reduced to obligatory holiday calls and the occasional business consultation. His thumb hovered over the call button before he set the phone down. First, he needed to understand his own son. Opening his laptop, Jonathan did what he did best: research. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he pulled up everything he could find about Bradford Academy's mathematics program, about child development at age 12, about rebuilding relationships with estranged children. The familiar act of gathering information helped calm his racing thoughts. A notification popped up on his screen, the latest stock prices, a reminder of the world he'd built his life around. But for once, the numbers didn't hold his attention. Instead, his eyes kept drifting to the business card Emily had left, her cell phone number written in the same elegant handwriting he remembered from love notes passed during college classes. "Sir," his assistant appeared at the door. "The Tokyo office is on the line." "They say it's urgent." Jonathan glanced at his watch, 3:15 p.m. The coffee shop would be a 20-minute drive in good traffic. For the second time that day, he did something unprecedented. "Tell them I'm unavailable until tomorrow." He stood, gathering his coat, "and clear my schedule for the rest of the afternoon." His assistant's jaw dropped slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Yes, sir. Should I have the car brought around?" Jonathan paused at the door, his hand resting on the handle. "No, I'll drive myself." As he walked through the office, he could feel the stares of his employees. Jonathan Hayes, leaving early. The rumors would start flying before he reached the elevator. Let them talk. For the first time in his carefully controlled life, he had no idea what would happen next. In his pocket, Emily's business card felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, carrying the weight of 12 years of absence, of choices made, and paths not taken. As the elevator descended, Jonathan closed his eyes and saw Liam's face again, his own features mixed with Emily's, creating something entirely new and unexpectedly powerful. The perfect life he'd built was cracking, like a sheet of glass under too much pressure. But perhaps, he thought as the elevator doors opened to the lobby, it was time to let it break. Carter's Bean was exactly the kind of place Jonathan Hayes would normally avoid. The mismatched furniture, the chalkboard menu with its artistic swirls, the soft indie music playing overhead, it all spoke of a casual disorder that made him instinctively uncomfortable. Yet here he sat, his Italian leather briefcase perched awkwardly on a worn wooden chair, waiting for a son he'd never known he had. He'd arrived 20 minutes early, another habit he couldn't break. The barista, a college-aged girl with bright purple hair, had already given him 3 concerned looks as his untouched Americano grew cold. His fingers kept reaching for his phone, but he forced himself to leave it in his pocket. No distractions. Not today. The bell above the door chimed at exactly 4 o'clock. Emily entered first, her professional attire replaced by casual wear that reminded Jonathan of their college days. Liam followed, still in his Bradford uniform, but now clutching a silver trophy that caught the afternoon light. "First place," Emily announced with quiet pride as they approached the table. "Advanced Mathematics Division." Jonathan stood, perhaps too quickly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Congratulations," he said, the word feeling inadequate. "That's impressive." Liam's fingers tightened around the trophy. "It was just algebra," he mumbled, but the slight lift of his chin betrayed his pride. "Nothing special." "Algebra at 12 is special," Jonathan replied, then caught himself. What right did he have to comment on his son's achievements? He'd missed 12 years of them. Emily ordered hot chocolate for Liam and herbal tea for herself, settling into the chair between them like a mediator at a negotiation. The parallel wasn't lost on Jonathan. He'd sat through enough corporate mediations to recognize the tension in the air. "Would you—" Jonathan cleared his throat. "Would you tell me about the competition?" Liam glanced at his mother, who nodded encouragingly. "We had to solve 10 problems in 30 minutes. He began, his voice growing stronger as he spoke about mathematics, familiar territory for both father and son. The last one was about optimization, finding the maximum volume of a box given a fixed surface area. "Calculus," Jonathan said, genuine surprise in his voice. "You're studying calculus." "Not officially." Liam's eyes lit up despite his obvious attempt to remain distant. "But I found some online courses, and Mum got me extra books from the library." Emily smiled softly. "He reads them at breakfast, just like you used to with your finance textbooks." The comparison hung in the air between them. Jonathan remembered those mornings, Emily making coffee while he pored over market analyses, believing he was laying the foundation for their perfect future. How wrong he'd been about what perfect meant. "And the trophy will look nice in your room," Emily said, breaking the silence. "Actually," Liam hesitated, then reached into his backpack. He pulled out a slightly crumpled piece of paper. "There's a summer mathematics program at Columbia for gifted students." He pushed the paper across the table, not quite meeting Jonathan's eyes. "The deadline for applications is next week." Jonathan took the paper, noting the way Liam's hand trembled slightly. The program was prestigious. He recognized it from his company's educational initiatives, 6 weeks of advanced study, culminating in a research project, the kind of opportunity that could shape a young person's future. "The recommendation letters," Liam continued, his voice smaller now. "They're supposed to come from parents. Mom already wrote hers, but they prefer having both, if possible." The unspoken question filled the coffee shop. Jonathan studied the application form, his CEO's mind automatically calculating dates and logistics. The program would conflict with 3 major business trips, 2 board meetings, and the annual shareholders' convention. "I would be honored," he said, surprising himself with the immediacy of his response. "But," he looked directly at Liam, "I'll need to learn more about you, about your goals." "A recommendation letter should be personal." Something flickered in Liam's eyes. Hope, perhaps, or skepticism, maybe both. "You mean you want to spend time with me?" "Yes." The word came easily, but the implications terrified him. Time was the one commodity Jonathan Hayes had never given freely. His calendar was planned months in advance, each hour allocated with surgical precision. Yet here he was, offering open-ended commitment to a boy who had every reason to reject it. "We could—" Liam glanced at his mother again, receiving another encouraging nod. "I practice math problems during lunch break, in the school courtyard. If you wanted to, if you're not too busy." "When?" Jonathan asked, already reaching for his phone. "Tuesdays and Thursdays, 12:30 to 1. Jonathan pulled up his calendar. Next Tuesday showed a crucial meeting with potential investors from Dubai. His finger hovered over the screen for a moment before he began typing, "Reschedule Dubai meeting." "I'll be there," he said, looking up to find both Emily and Liam watching him with matching expressions of surprise. "Next Tuesday, 12:30. The bell above the door chimed again as new customers entered, bringing with them a burst of city noise that broke the moment. Emily checked her watch and began gathering her things. "We should go," she said. "Liam has homework, and I'm sure you have meetings to return to." Jonathan stood, fighting the urge to extend his hand for a formal handshake, his default goodbye in every business interaction. Instead, he awkwardly lifted his hand in a half-wave. "Thank you," he said, looking at both of them, "for the chance to—" He couldn't finish the sentence. How do you thank someone for the opportunity to begin undoing 12 years of absence? As they left, Liam turned back briefly. "Don't forget about Tuesday," he said, his voice carrying a mix of challenge and plea that hit Jonathan like a physical force. "I won't," Jonathan promised, knowing that this was one commitment he couldn't afford to break. Through the coffee shop window, he watched them walk away again. But this time, instead of seeing what he'd lost, he focused on what he might still gain if he could just learn to solve this most complex of equations: how to be a father to a son who had every reason to reject him. The Dubai investors were not happy about the rescheduled meeting. Jonathan could feel their displeasure radiating through the video conference screen as he attempted to explain his sudden unavailability. "A family emergency," he said, the words foreign on his tongue. For 15 years, he'd been the man without obligations, the CEO who could fly across the globe at a moment's notice. Now, he was rearranging a $100 million deal to eat lunch with a 12-year-old. "We expected more. Commitment from Hayes Industries," said Ahmad al-Rashid, his carefully neutral tone carrying an edge of warning. "And perhaps we should explore other options." 5 days ago, this threat would have sent Jonathan into crisis mode. Today, he found himself strangely unmoved. "Do what you need to do, Ahmad. We'll reconnect next week." He ended the call before the investors could respond, something else he'd never done before. "Sir?" His assistant, Linda, appeared at the door. She'd worked with him for 10 years and had never looked quite this concerned. "The board is requesting an emergency meeting. There are rumors about your behavior yesterday." Jonathan glanced at his watch. 10:15 a.m. 2 hours and 15 minutes until he was supposed to meet Liam. How long will it take? They've blocked out 2 hours. There's significant concern about the Dubai situation, and Mr. McAllister has been making some suggestions. Bradley McAllister, of course. His chief rival on the board would see any sign of weakness as an opportunity. Jonathan had appointed him to the board 3 years ago, believing it better to keep enemies close. Now that decision was coming back to haunt him. "Fine, but it ends at noon. Exactly." Linda's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded and left to make the arrangements. Jonathan turned to his window, the city sprawling below as always, but today it felt less like a kingdom and more like a maze he needed to escape. His phone buzzed. A text from Emily. "Liam's excited about lunch. Try not to disappoint him." The words stung with their implicit warning. How many times had he disappointed her? How many promises had he broken in pursuit of his empire? He began typing a response, deleted it, tried again, deleted that too. Finally, he simply wrote, "I'll be there." The board meeting was exactly as unpleasant as he'd expected. 12 faces around the mahogany table, all wearing expressions of carefully crafted concern as Bradley McAllister led the charge. 2 cancelled meetings in 2 days, Bradley said, his silver hair catching the fluorescent light. Unscheduled departures from the office, rescheduling the Dubai investors without consultation. "This isn't like you, Jonathan. My personal schedule is not board business," Jonathan replied, his voice carrying the steel edge that had won him so many corporate battles. "It is when it affects shareholder value," Bradley countered, sliding a tablet across the table. "Our stock dropped 3 points this morning on rumors of instability in leadership." Jonathan glanced at the numbers, his mind automatically calculating the losses. Millions evaporating because he'd chosen to have lunch with his son. The irony might have made him laugh if the stakes weren't so high. "I have personal matters to attend to," he said finally. "They won't affect the company's performance." "Personal matters?" Bradley's eyebrows rose. "You've never had personal matters before. That's why the board chose you. You were unlimited, unencumbered. The perfect corporate warrior." The description hit uncomfortably close to home. Jonathan remembered the board meeting where he'd been appointed CEO, young, ambitious, and proudly declaring that he had no attachments to hold him back. No wife, no children, no messy emotional ties to complicate his decisions. "Things change," he said simply. "Not in this business." Bradley leaned forward. "We're concerned, Jonathan. Perhaps it's time to consider a temporary leave of absence, for your own good, of course." The threat was clear. Jonathan felt the familiar surge of competitive anger, the urge to crush this challenge as he had so many others. But the clock on the wall showed 11:45. In 45 minutes, Liam would be waiting in the Bradford Academy courtyard. "My position is not up for discussion," he said, standing. "And now, if you'll excuse me, I have an appointment." "Jonathan," Bradley called as he reached the door, "don't forget who you are, what you've built. Are you really willing to risk it all for personal matters?" Jonathan paused, his hand on the door handle. Through the glass walls, he could see his empire, hundreds of employees, millions in assets, the culmination of 15 years of single-minded dedication. "I'll see you tomorrow, Bradley." The elevator ride to the garage felt longer than usual. Jonathan caught his reflection in the polished doors. Perfect suit, perfect tie, perfect hair. The costume of success. But for the first time, it felt like just that. A costume. His phone buzzed again as he reached his car. Another stock alert showing further decline. Another crisis demanding his attention. Another test of his priorities. Jonathan started the engine, his decision already made. The Empire could wait. Right now, he had a math problem to solve. How to bridge the distance between a father and son, separated by 12 years of choices he couldn't undo. As he pulled out of the garage, he loosened his tie slightly. Perfect, he was beginning to realize, might need a new definition. Bradford Academy's courtyard was a study in old-world elegance. Ivy-covered walls surrounded a perfectly manicured lawn where ancient oak trees provided patches of shade. Jonathan found Liam exactly where he said he would be. At a stone table beneath the largest oak, math textbooks spread around him like a fortress. For a moment, Jonathan just watched. His son's dark head was bent over a notebook, pencil moving rapidly across the page. The scene stirred something in his memory. Himself at that age, seeking refuge in numbers when words and emotions became too complicated. "That's wrong," Liam said without looking up as Jonathan approached. "The derivative. You've been standing there long enough to see it." Jonathan glanced at the problem. A complex calculus equation sprawled across the page, far beyond standard 7th grade mathematics. "The negative sign," he said, stepping closer. "And before the second term." Now Liam did look up, a flash of surprise crossing his face. "You know calculus. I minored in mathematics in college." Jonathan gestured to the empty space on the stone bench. "May I?" Liam nodded, sliding his book slightly to make room. Up close, Jonathan could see dark smudges under his son's eyes. "Trouble sleeping? Mum says I study too late." Liam erased the incorrect sign with more force than necessary. "But the Columbia program is still months away," Jonathan finished. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a brown paper bag. "I brought lunch, if you're hungry." Liam's eyes widened as Jonathan unpacked 2 sandwiches from Williams' Deli, the same place he'd gotten his own lunch every day during his Columbia years. "Turkey and avocado," Jonathan explained. "Unless you're vegetarian or have allergies, or—" "It's fine," Liam interrupted, taking the sandwich. "Thanks." They ate in silence for a few minutes, the oak leaves casting shifting patterns on Liam's notebook. Jonathan's phone buzzed in his pocket, probably Linda with more crisis updates. But he didn't reach for it. "Why didn't you want me?" The question came suddenly, between bites of sandwich. Liam didn't look up from his calculus problem, as if asking about abandonment was just another variable to solve. Jonathan set his sandwich down. He'd known this question was coming, had rehearsed answers in his mind, but now they all felt inadequate. "I was wrong," he said finally. "I thought success meant never letting anything or anyone slow me down. And now—" Liam's pencil had stopped moving, but his eyes remained fixed on the page. "Now I'm learning that I was solving the wrong equation." This made Liam look up, really look at him for the first time since he'd arrived. Mum says you're some kind of business genius, that you built your company from nothing." "The company was easier than this," Jonathan admitted. "Numbers don't hold grudges." A ghost of a smile touched Liam's lips. "No, they don't." He pushed his notebook slightly toward Jonathan. "Show me where I went wrong with the derivative." Jonathan leaned closer, inhaling the scent of pencil shavings and grass. His phone buzzed again, more insistently this time. A quick glance showed 5 missed calls from Bradley McAllister. "Shouldn't you get that?" Liam asked, his voice carefully neutral. "It seems important. Not as important as this." Jonathan turned his phone off completely, something he hadn't done in 15 years, and set it aside. Now, about that derivative. They spent the next 20 minutes working through the problem, their heads bent together over the notebook. Jonathan found himself slipping easily into teacher mode, explaining concepts the way he wished someone had explained them to him at Liam's age. "You're good at this," Liam said quietly as they solved the final step. "At explaining things. I had a lot of practice teaching myself," Jonathan replied. "My father, he wasn't around much. Like you." The words could have been accusatory, but Liam's tone was more curious than bitter. "Yes," Jonathan acknowledged. Like me, but I'm trying to change that, if you'll let me." Liam closed his notebook, finally meeting Jonathan's eyes directly. "Mum says you never do anything halfway, that once you commit to something, You're all in. She's right. So, if I let you in, Liam's fingers traced the edge of his textbook. You won't just disappear again. When things get complicated. Before Jonathan could answer, a commotion at the courtyard entrance drew their attention. A group of reporters had gathered, cameras pointed in their direction. Bradley McAllister stood among them, his expression a mixture of triumph and concern. "Mr. Hayes," one reporter called out, "can you comment on rumors that you have an illegitimate son? Is this why you've been behaving erratically?" Liam's face drained of color. "They're here because of me." Jonathan stood, instinctively moving to shield his son from the cameras. His mind raced through scenarios, calculating outcomes like market trajectories. The story would break by evening. Markets would react. The board would demand action. But for once, these weren't the variables that mattered most. "Come on," he said to Liam, gathering the boy's books with one hand while keeping himself between his son and the press. "I know another way out." "Your company," Liam started. "Will survive," Jonathan finished. He guided Liam toward a side door he'd noticed earlier, his CEO's mind already mapping escape routes. "Right now, I'm more concerned about your privacy and your mother's." They slipped through the door just as more reporters arrived. Jonathan led them through empty hallways, following exit signs until they reached a service entrance at the back of the school. "My car's around the corner," he said, handing Liam his books. "I'll have my driver pick it up later. Right now, I'm taking you home. But your meetings can wait." Jonathan pulled out his phone and turned it on long enough to send a quick text to Emily. "Press found us, bringing Liam home. Don't worry." As they walked to his car, Jonathan felt Liam's eyes on him. "You really turned off your phone," the boy said, wonder creeping into his voice. "But for the whole lunch?" "Yes, even when it kept buzzing." Even then, they reached the car, and Jonathan opened the passenger door for his son. Before getting in, Liam paused. "Next Thursday," he said. "Same time?" Jonathan felt something tight in his chest, loosen slightly. "I'll be there, without my phone." "Okay." Liam slid into the seat, hugging his books to his chest. "And maybe bring those sandwiches again." "I will." Jonathan closed the door gently, then walked around to the driver's side. Through the windshield, he could see more reporters arriving at the school's main entrance. His phone had begun buzzing again in his pocket, but as he started the car, glancing at his son in the passenger seat, Jonathan Hayes, for the first time in his adult life, found himself completely certain about which variables truly mattered. The headlines exploded across every major business publication within hours. Hayes, industry's CEO's secret son, revealed. Corporate Titan's hidden family scandal. Jonathan Hayes, the father who chose profit over parenthood. Emily's living room felt like a bunker as the three of them watched the story unfold on multiple screens. Jonathan stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear as he dealt with one crisis after another. Emily sat on the couch, fielding calls from Liam's school about security concerns. And Liam, Jonathan kept glancing at him, sat cross-legged on the floor, pretending to do homework while obviously listening to every word. "No comment," Jonathan said, for what felt like the 100th time, then ended the call. "The board's calling an emergency session tomorrow morning. They're voting on whether to implement Article 7. Emily's head snapped up. "The leadership removal clause. You remember the company bylaws?" A hint of their old intimacy crept into Jonathan's voice. "I helped write them," she reminded him. Her legal expertise had been instrumental in Hayes Industries' early days. Another fact he'd conveniently forgotten over the years. "They can't just fire you," Liam said suddenly, abandoning his pretense of studying. "Can they?" "Over having a kid, over destabilizing investor confidence," Jonathan corrected gently. "The Dubai deal's falling apart. Our stock has dropped 12 points since this morning. Bradley's pushing the narrative that I've been mentally unstable, hiding a secret family while making erratic business decisions. But that's not," Liam started, then stopped as his phone lit up with a notification. His face paled slightly. Emily was by his side instantly. "What is it?" "Instagram," Liam mumbled. Someone at school posted pictures. There are comments. Jonathan crossed the room in 3 strides, fighting the urge to snatch the phone away. Instead, he knelt beside his son, reading over his shoulder. The comments ranged from mockingly sympathetic to openly cruel, his classmates already taking sides in a drama they didn't understand. "I can't go back to school tomorrow," Liam said quietly. "Everyone will stare." "Ask questions." "Yes, you can," Emily said firmly. "You'll hold your head high and—" "No." Jonathan surprised himself with the force of his response. "He's right. Not tomorrow. Not until we have security measures in place." He looked at Emily. "They'll stake out the school, follow him. Try to get pictures, interviews, anything they can sell. Like they did with us," Emily said softly, and Jonathan remembered those early days of his success. Photographers hiding in bushes, reporters ambushing them at restaurants. It had been one of the many pressures that had fractured their marriage. His phone buzzed again. Linda's name flashed on the screen, along with a message that made his blood run cold. Bradley called an off-books board meeting. "They're moving up the vote. Tonight." "I have to go," he said, already standing. "They're trying to force a vote before I can mount a defense. Running off to save the company." The bitterness in Liam's voice stopped Jonathan in his tracks. "I guess some things don't change." "Liam," Emily warned, but Jonathan held up a hand. "No, he's right to be angry." He turned to his son. "I've run away from the important things before, but not this time." He pulled out his phone and dialed Linda. "Get me Bradley, now." The phone rang twice before Bradley's smooth voice answered. "Jonathan, I assume you've heard about the emergency session. Cancel it. I don't think you're in a position to make demands. The board is concerned about your judgment, and frankly, these revelations about your secret family, they're not secret anymore." Jonathan cut him off. "So let's do this properly. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., full board meeting with press attendance." Emily's eyebrows shot up. Liam looked up from his phone, suddenly alert. "You want to make this public?" Bradley's surprise was evident. "That's corporate suicide." 9 a.m., Jonathan repeated. "Oh, and Bradley, bring your resignation letter." He ended the call to find both Emily and Liam staring at him. "What are you planning?" Emily asked, a note of worry in her voice. "The truth," Jonathan said simply. "All of it. No more hiding, no more choices I'll regret in 12 years. He looked at Liam. "But I'll need your help. Both of you." "Me?" Liam's voice cracked slightly. "What can I do?" Jonathan sat down on the floor beside his son, noticing how the boy instinctively shifted closer. "Tell me about the Columbia program, about your dreams, about who you want to become." "Why?" "Because tomorrow I'm going to tell the world a story. Not about a CEO who hid his past, but about a father who finally learned what success really means." He glanced at Emily. "With your permission, of course." Emily studied him for a long moment, seeing perhaps something of the man she'd first fallen in love with, the one who dreamed of changing the world, before dreams became dominated by profit margins. Okay," she said finally, "but we do this as a family, all cards on the table." "All cards on the table," Jonathan agreed. He turned to Liam. "Starting with that Instagram post. Show me everything they're saying. We face it together." Liam hesitated, then handed over his phone. As they scrolled through the comments together, Jonathan felt his son's shoulder press against his arm, a small gesture of trust that meant more than any business deal he'd ever closed. Outside, reporters had begun gathering on the street, their cameras flashing in the growing dusk. Tomorrow would bring chaos, challenges, possibly the end of everything he'd built. But sitting there on Emily's living room floor, helping his son craft responses to Instagram trolls while his empire teetered on the brink, Jonathan Hayes finally understood what his younger self had gotten wrong. Success wasn't about what you could achieve on your own. It was about who would stand beside you when achievement stopped mattering. The Hayes Industries boardroom had never been so crowded. Press lined the walls, cameras ready. Board members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, eyeing the media presence with barely concealed anxiety. Bradley McAllister sat at the far end of the table, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his expression set in concerned disappointment, the picture of a responsible executive forced to make difficult decisions. Jonathan stood at the window, watching Emily's car pull into the parking garage below. They had argued about this all morning, whether she and Liam should come, whether exposing their son to this corporate warfare was worth the risk. In the end, Liam had made the decision for them. "I want to see you fight for us," he had said over breakfast, his voice small but determined. "Really fight, not just say you will." Now, as the boardroom door opened to admit them, Jonathan saw Bradley's practiced concern slip for just a moment. This wasn't part of his rival's script. The son and ex-wife weren't supposed to be here, weren't supposed to be anything more than abstract concepts to be wielded against Jonathan's leadership. "Mr. Hayes," Bradley began, standing. "Given the sensitive nature of today's discussion, perhaps family members should what?" Emily's lawyer voice cut through the room. "Should be hidden away, like they have been for 12 years. Cameras clicked rapidly. Jonathan caught Liam's eye and gave him a slight nod. The boy took his seat in the front row of chairs they'd set up along the wall, his back straight, chin lifted in that gesture that was so painfully familiar. "Members of the board," Bradley continued smoothly, "we're here today to address serious concerns about Mr. Hayes's fitness to lead this company. Recent revelations about his secret family." "There's nothing secret about my family," Jonathan interrupted, moving to stand at the head of the table. "Not anymore, and that's what I want to talk about today." He pulled out his phone, not his usual sleek business model, but his old personal phone, the one he dug out of his desk drawer last night. 12 years ago, I made a choice, the wrong choice. I convinced myself that success meant never letting anything slow you down, never letting anyone need you, never being vulnerable. Jonathan tapped the phone's screen, and a photo appeared on the boardroom's main display. Him and Emily on their wedding day, young and laughing, full of dreams that had nothing to do with stock prices. I told myself I was protecting the company, that a CEO couldn't have distractions, that emotional attachments were weakness. He swiped to another photo, Emily, radiant and clearly pregnant, which made several board members shift uncomfortably. I told myself a lot of things, and you all rewarded me for it. The perfect corporate warrior, wasn't that what you called me, Bradley? The board's concern, Bradley interjected, is not about your personal life, but about your recent erratic behavior. You mean like this? Jonathan pulled up the Dubai investment proposal. The deal you've been telling everyone I'm jeopardizing. Take a look at page 47, paragraph 3. The clause about alternative financing that would give them controlling interest in our Asian operations after 2 years. Murmurs rippled through the board as members quickly flipped through their copies. Bradley's face tightened almost imperceptibly. I didn't cancel that meeting because I was erratic, Jonathan continued. I cancelled it because it was a hostile takeover attempt wrapped in a friendship bracelet. Just like I'm not being erratic now. I'm being a father, finally. He turned to Liam, who was watching with wide eyes. I missed 12 years of my son's life because I thought that's what success required. I missed his first steps, his first words, his first day of school. I missed celebrating when he discovered his gift for mathematics, when he started taking college-level courses at 12, when he won competitions that I should have been cheering at. Jonathan pulled up another document on the screen. Liam's Columbia program application. My son is brilliant. He's going to change the world someday, probably through mathematics that most of us in this room couldn't begin to understand. And I almost missed that too. This is very touching, Bradley said, his voice dripping with artificial sympathy, but it doesn't address the core issue of shareholder value. Actually, it does. Jonathan straightened his tie. His father's tie, the one he'd worn to every major business meeting since starting the company. Because I'm not choosing between my family and this company. I'm choosing to run this company the way I should have from the start, with humanity, With understanding that our employees have families, have lives outside these walls, have children they want to see grow up, he turned to address the press directly now. Yes, I have a son, a remarkable young man who I'm just getting to know, who I should have known all along. Yes, I made mistakes, choosing profit over parenthood, success over love. And yes, those choices helped build this company. But they were the wrong choices, and I'm done making them. Jonathan pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. This is my new contract. It includes comprehensive family leave policies for all employees, flexible scheduling options, and a commitment to work-life balance that starts at the top. I'll be taking Tuesday and Thursday lunches off to help my son prepare for his Columbia application. I'll be leaving at reasonable hours to have dinner with my family. And I'll be expecting every executive in this company to do the same. He slid the contract toward the board members. If you want to vote me out for that, go ahead. But understand what message you'll be sending to every parent working for this company, every person trying to balance ambition with love. The boardroom had gone completely silent. Even the cameras had stopped clicking. Jonathan felt Liam's eyes on him, felt the weight of Emily's gaze, felt 12 years of wrong choices pressing down on his shoulders. There's one more thing, he said, his voice softer now. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a worn piece of paper, the marriage certificate he'd kept face down in his desk for so long. I was wrong about what makes a person successful, wrong about what makes a company strong, wrong about almost everything that mattered. He looked at Emily, then at Liam. But I'm done being wrong. I'm done hiding what matters. I'm done pretending that love makes you weak. Bradley started to speak, but Jonathan held up his hand. The vote is simple. Either accept my new contract with all its provisions for human dignity and family life, or fire me, right here, right now, in front of everyone. He sat down, feeling strangely light. Through the window, he could see the empire he'd built stretching toward the sky, but for the first time he saw it clearly, not as a monument to ambition, but as a chance to build something that truly mattered. The boardroom erupted in chaos, but Jonathan wasn't listening anymore. He was watching Liam, who had risen from his seat and taken a small step forward, his eyes shining with something that looked remarkably like pride. The vote took 4 hours. 4 hours of debate, deliberation, and desperate maneuvering behind closed doors, while Jonathan, Emily, and Liam waited in his office. The city lights had begun to twinkle in the gathering dusk by the time Linda knocked on the door. "They're ready," she said softly. Jonathan looked at his son, who had spent the afternoon working on calculus problems at his desk, a sight that made something in his chest ache with both joy and regret. Whatever happens," he said. "I meant every word." Liam closed his textbook. "I know." The walk back to the boardroom felt different now. Employees lined the hallways, watching silently as they passed. Jonathan noticed things he'd overlooked for years. Family photos on desks, children's drawings pinned to cubicle walls, all the small reminders of lives that existed beyond these glass and steel confines. The board members sat in stony silence as they entered. Bradley McAllister's chair was conspicuously empty. Mr. Hayes, Richard Chen, the eldest board member, stood. His face gave nothing away. "The board has reached a decision." Jonathan felt Emily's hand brush against his arm. A gesture so subtle it might have been accidental, but it steadied him nonetheless. "Before you announce it," Jonathan said, "I want to add something to my earlier terms." He turned to Emily. "If I stay, I want you back too. Not as my wife. That's a bridge we burned long ago. But as our chief legal officer, you helped build this company. You should help rebuild it." A murmur ran through the board. Emily's eyes widened slightly. "Jonathan, you're the best corporate lawyer I've ever known," he continued. "And more importantly, you understand what we're trying to build here. A company that values family as much as profit, that sees humanity as an asset, not a liability. The board has not discussed this addition," Richard said, frowning. "Then consider it part of the package. All or nothing." Liam looked between his parents. his expression a mix of hope and uncertainty. Jonathan wondered if the boy was remembering the stories Emily must have told him about the early days, when his parents had been partners in every sense of the word. Richard cleared his throat. Very well. The board's decision is as follows. Your contract provisions are accepted, with quarterly review periods for the first year. Bradley McAllister's resignation has been accepted, effective immediately. And, he glanced at Emily, we would be honored to welcome back Mrs. Carter as CLO, pending standard approval processes. The tension in the room broke like a fever. Board members began talking all at once. Phones appeared as people rushed to share the news. But Jonathan wasn't watching them. He was watching Liam, who had gone very still. Does this mean... The boy started, then stopped. It means your father kept his promise, Emily said quietly. For once. It means more than that, Jonathan added. He knelt down to meet his son's eyes. It means we're building something new. All of us. If you want to be part of it. Liam's response was interrupted by Linda, who burst through the door with uncharacteristic urgency. Sir, the stock! You need to see this! The boardroom's main screen lit up with trading data. Hayes Industries stock was soaring, up 15 points and climbing. Social media was exploding with hashtags. Chuck Family First, Chuck Hayes Revolution, Cha-Cha Corporate Change. Video clips of Jonathan's speech were going viral, shared by working parents around the world. Apparently, Richard said dryly, valuing family is good for business. Who knew? Later that evening, after the press had finally dispersed and the board members had gone home, Jonathan found himself alone in his office with Emily. Liam had fallen asleep on the leather couch, his calculus book still open on his chest. You didn't have to offer me the job, Emily said, looking out at their old view. I have a good practice of my own now. I know, Jonathan stood beside her, but I meant what I said. You understand what we're trying to build. And what exactly are we trying to build, Jonathan? She turned to face him. Because if this is just another one of your grand gestures, it's not. He glanced at their sleeping son. For the first time in my life, I'm not thinking about the next quarter or the next year. I'm thinking about the world he's going to inherit, the example we're setting. Emily was quiet for a moment. He has a piano recital next week, Thursday evening. I'll be there. You have the Beijing conference call. I'll move it. Jonathan smiled slightly. That's what we're building, a company where that's not even a difficult choice. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their son sleep. Outside, the city hummed with its usual energy, but it felt different now, less like a kingdom to conquer and more like a home to nurture. He plays piano, Jonathan asked softly. Classical and jazz. He has your ear for mathematics and my love of music. Emily's voice held a hint of amusement. He's been working on a piece about patterns and progressions, trying to find the mathematical structure in Bach. Of course he has. Jonathan felt his throat tighten. All the years he'd missed, all the discoveries and achievements he'd ignored, but also all the possibilities that still lay ahead. His phone buzzed. Another stock alert, another crisis requiring attention. But for the first time in his career, Jonathan Hayes let it ring. Instead, he walked over to his sleeping son and gently took the calculus book from his chest, marking the page before closing it. Some equations, he was learning, were worth taking time to solve. The Beijing team was not happy about the rescheduled conference call. Their faces on the video screen showed barely concealed frustration as Jonathan wrapped up the meeting 3 hours earlier than planned. Your concerns are noted, he said, checking his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. But the new policies apply to everyone, including me, especially me. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning, your time. He ended the call before they could protest, already reaching for the garment bag hanging on his office door. The traditional business suit felt wrong for tonight. Instead, he pulled out the charcoal grey casual suit Emily had suggested, something a father would wear to his son's recital, she'd said. Sir? Linda appeared in the doorway. The Asian markets are showing some volatility. The board is requesting, not tonight, Jonathan adjusted his tie, not his usual power tie, but a softer blue one that matched Liam's school colors. Remember the new protocol. Family events are blackout zones. No calls unless the building is literally on fire. And if it's metaphorically on fire, then we'll deal with it in the morning. He grabbed his coat. How many people showed up for the first voluntary work-life balance seminar today? Standing room only, Linda smiled. Turns out a lot of people have been waiting for permission to prioritize their families. Oh, and this came for Liam. She handed him a small package from the Columbia Summer Program. Jonathan's hands tightened on the package. The application deadline was next week, and Liam had been working himself to exhaustion preparing for it. Last night, over their now regular Tuesday dinner, he'd confessed his fear of not being good enough. The drive to Bradford Academy's Performing Arts Center took exactly 23 minutes. Jonathan knew because he'd done a trial run the day before, determined not to be late. He found Emily in the lobby, looking elegant in a dark blue dress. "You're early," she said, sounding pleased. "How is he?" "Nervous. He changed his piece at the last minute. He wants to play something he wrote himself." Jonathan's eyebrows rose. "He composes, too. It's his first original piece. He's been working on it in secret for weeks." Emily hesitated. He says it's about you, about all of us." Before Jonathan could respond, the lobby lights flickered, a 5-minute warning. He followed Emily into the auditorium, which was already filled with parents clutching programs and smartphones. They found their seats in the front row, reserved for performers, families. "Did the Beijing call go okay?" Emily whispered as they sat down. "Ask me tomorrow." Jonathan pulled out the package from Columbia. "This came." Emily's breath caught. "Should we open it?" "After. He needs to focus on tonight." The lights dimmed, and the first students began their performances. Jonathan found himself unconsciously analyzing each piece, looking for patterns and structures the way he did with market data. But when Liam walked onto the stage, all analysis stopped. His son wore a dark blue suit that matched Emily's dress. He looked impossibly young under the spotlight, but his posture as he sat at the piano carried that familiar determination. "And tonight," Liam spoke into the microphone, his voice only slightly shaky, "I'm playing an original composition called Variables and Constants. It's about—" He paused, scanning the audience until he found his parents. "It's about how some things change and some things stay the same, but sometimes what you thought was variable turns out to be constant all along." The piece began softly, with a simple mathematical progression that gradually grew more complex. Jonathan recognized elements of Bach in the structure, but there was something else too, a modern edge that spoke of uncertainty and searching. The melody fragmented and reformed, like a family breaking apart and finding its way back together. As the music swelled, Jonathan felt Emily's hand slip into his. They hadn't touched like this since before the divorce, but somehow it felt right. Not romantic, but connected by something larger than themselves. By the boy on stage who carried both their strengths and had survived their weaknesses. The final movement was something entirely new. The mathematical precision remained, but it was softer now, more hopeful. The melody that had been searching throughout the piece finally found its resolution, not in a dramatic crescendo, but in a quiet moment of clarity. The audience erupted in applause. Jonathan and Emily stood with everyone else, but they couldn't take their eyes off their son. Liam's face was flushed with excitement and relief as he bowed. And when he looked at his parents, his smile was radiant. After the recital, they found him in the green room, surrounded by classmates offering congratulations. The awkwardness from the press coverage had faded, replaced by genuine admiration for his talent. "Dad!" Liam broke away from his friends. "You really came?" "Of course I came." Jonathan pulled out the package from Columbia. "This arrived today." Liam's eyes widened. "Is it—" "Open it," Emily encouraged. With trembling fingers, Liam tore open the envelope. His eyes scanned the letter, then looked up, shining with tears. "I got in. Full scholarship." The hug took them all by surprise. Liam threw his arms around both his parents, and for a moment they stood there, a tableau of everything that had been lost and found again. "The peace," Jonathan said when they finally separated. "The resolution at the end. It's us," Liam explained. "The variables, all the things that kept changing, kept going wrong, but the constants were always there, underneath, like math, like—" He glanced between his parents. "And like family." Jonathan's phone buzzed in his pocket, probably more fallout from the Beijing call. But as he stood in that green room, watching his son explain the mathematical structures in his music to his impressed classmates, while Emily looked on with pride, he understood what Liam's music had been trying to say. Some constants were worth more than any variable could measure, and some equations could only be solved with the heart. The media called it the Hayes effect. In the month since Jonathan's boardroom declaration, companies across the country had begun implementing similar family-first policies. Wall Street Journal ran a front-page story about corporate culture transformation. Time magazine wanted him for their cover, but at this moment, none of that mattered as much as the conversation happening in his kitchen. "You can't just buy me a whole new wardrobe," Liam protested, looking at the pile of clothes Jonathan had delivered for the Columbia program. "Mom, tell him." Emily sipped her coffee, hiding a smile. "Your father's right about one thing. You've grown 2 inches in the past month. None of your old clothes fit properly." They'd fallen into a routine of Sunday breakfasts at Jonathan's penthouse. Not because he couldn't cook, though he couldn't, but because his kitchen had the best view of the city, and Liam loved watching the sunrise while working on his latest mathematical theories. "Besides," Jonathan said, carefully flipping a pancake without dropping it, "consider it 12 years of missed birthday presents." "That's emotional manipulation," Liam pointed out, but he was smiling. "Using guilt to justify excessive spending." "He's right," Emily agreed. "Although I seem to remember someone using similar tactics to justify a new graphing calculator last week. That was different. That was for education." Jonathan set a plate of slightly burned pancakes on the table. "And clothes aren't educational. What about that study you showed me about the impact of professional attire on academic performance?" Liam's eyes narrowed. "Now you're using my own research against me. That's good parenting?" Jonathan suggested. "Annoying," Liam concluded, but he was grinning as he reached for the syrup. The easy banter still felt like a miracle to Jonathan. 2 months ago, he wouldn't have believed this possible. Sitting in his kitchen on a Sunday morning, making terrible pancakes, teasing his son about clothes, while his ex-wife watched with amused tolerance. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Hayes Industries stocks hit record high as family-first policies show results. Emily caught his eye over her coffee cup. She'd seen it too. "Speaking of clothes," she said, smoothly changing the subject, "we need to discuss the Princeton conference next week." Liam looked up from his pancakes. "What Princeton conference?" "The mathematics department invited you to speak about your composition," Jonathan explained. "About how you incorporated mathematical principles into music." "Me?" Liam's fork clattered against his plate. "But I'm just a kid. Why would they want—" "Because you're brilliant," Emily said simply. "And because what you're doing, combining mathematics and music, finding patterns in Bach, creating your own mathematical compositions, it's unique." "The press will be there," Jonathan added carefully. They'd been protective of Liam's privacy since the boardroom incident, but this was different. Not business reporters this time, education writers, arts journalists, people interested in the work itself, not the family drama. Liam pushed his pancakes around his plate, thinking, "Will you both come? Wild horses couldn't keep us away," Emily assured him. "Even if there's a board meeting." Liam looked at his father. "Or a crisis in Beijing. The board can wait." "Beijing can wait," Jonathan sat down at the table. "But if you're not comfortable with this, we can decline. No pressure." Liam was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful in a way that reminded Jonathan painfully of himself at that age, always calculating, always weighing variables. "I want to do it," he said finally. "But can I play the new piece, the one I'm working on, the one you won't let anyone hear yet?" Emily raised an eyebrow. The super secret project. Liam nodded, his cheeks slightly flushed. It's different from variables and constants, more complex. It's about what happens after you find the constants, how you build something new without losing what you found. Jonathan felt something catch in his throat. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed again, this time with a video call from Richard Chen. "Take it," Emily said, standing to clear the plates. "The Sunday morning report is important." But Jonathan shook his head. "Richard can email me the highlights." He turned back to Liam. "Tell me more about this new piece." The smile that spread across his son's face was worth more than any stock report. For the next hour, Liam explained his musical mathematics, drawing diagrams on napkins, playing snippets on his phone, his excitement building as he shared his vision. Emily joined in occasionally, asking questions that revealed how much she'd learned about mathematics just by helping Liam pursue his passion. Jonathan found himself taking mental notes, not for any business purpose, but because he wanted to understand this beautiful, complex world his son inhabited. The breakfast dishes lay forgotten as morning stretched toward noon. Outside, the city hummed with its usual energy, but inside this kitchen, time seemed to move differently. Not in the relentless forward march of business quarters and fiscal years, but in the gentle rhythm of family conversations, shared discoveries, and half-burned pancakes. Jonathan's phone had gone silent, tucked away in his pocket where even Richard Chen couldn't reach him. The Sunday morning report would wait. The press inquiries would wait. The world that had been so impressed by his corporate transformation could wait. Because here, in this moment, watching his son explain how Bach's fugues followed the same patterns as prime number sequences, while Emily corrected his mathematical terminology with lawyerly precision, Jonathan Hayes finally understood what real success felt like. It felt like home. Princeton's Richardson Auditorium gleamed in the late afternoon sun, its Gothic architecture a stark contrast to the modern grand piano waiting on stage. Backstage, Liam paced in small circles, his new dress shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. "What if they don't understand it?" he asked, adjusting his tie for the 10th time. "What if the mathematics is too simple for them, or the music isn't complex enough, or—" "Liam," Jonathan stepped forward, gently straightening his son's tie. "Do you remember what you told me about Bach's mathematical secrets?" "Which part?" "About how every piece has its own internal logic, its own truth." Jonathan's hands moved to Liam's shoulders, solid and steady. "This is your truth, your way of seeing the world through numbers and notes. They'll understand because it's authentic." Liam took a deep breath. "Did you ever get nervous before big presentations?" "Every time," Jonathan admitted. "Still do. But you know what helps? Calculating prime numbers in your head. That's your thing," Jonathan smiled. "I think about what matters, not the audience, not the critics, not the outcomes, just the truth I'm trying to share." Emily appeared in the doorway, elegant in a deep purple dress. 5 minutes. The hall is packed. Mathematicians, musicians, professors. She crossed to them, smoothing Liam's collar. "And one very proud set of parents. Did you look at the program notes?" Liam asked suddenly. "The title of the new piece." "You wouldn't tell us," Emily reminded him. Liam pulled a folded paper from his pocket, handling it like it might break. "It's called integration." His voice grew softer. "Because in calculus, integration is about finding the whole from the parts, about bringing separate elements together to find something complete." Jonathan felt Emily's hand slip into his, a gesture that had become natural again, though in a different way than before. They weren't the young couple who had dreamed of changing the world, but they were something else now, partners in the most important project of their lives. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice announced over the speakers, "please welcome Liam Carter Hayes." The new hyphenated name had been Liam's choice, announced over breakfast 2 weeks ago. "Because both parts matter," he'd said. "Both parts make me who I am." Now, as he walked onto the stage, Liam looked impossibly young and impossibly old at the same time. The spotlight caught the silver highlights in his dark hair, so like Jonathan's, but styled in his own way. His posture at the piano was pure Emily, the same graceful confidence she showed in courtrooms. "Good evening," he began, his voice clear and steady. "I'm here to talk about the mathematics of music and the music of mathematics, about how patterns we think are separate are actually connected, about how sometimes the most complex equations can be expressed in the simplest melodies." He turned to the piano, and the hall fell silent. The first notes of integration filled the space, a theme that started simply but grew more intricate with each variation. Jonathan recognized elements of the previous piece, but transformed, matured. Where variables and constants had been about searching, this was about finding. As Liam played, mathematical formulae appeared on the screen behind him, synchronized with the music. The audience of professors and academics leaned forward in their seats, recognizing the complex mathematical principles woven into the melody. But they weren't just hearing equations, they were hearing the story of a family finding its way back together. In the fourth movement, Jonathan recognized a motif from Emily's favorite Bach piece, the one she used to play in their first apartment, when they were young and everything seemed possible. It was subtly integrated into a modern progression that somehow captured Liam's own voice while honoring its origins. The final movement was entirely new. As Liam's fingers danced across the keys, the mathematical formulae on the screen grew more complex, building to what looked like an impossible equation. But just when it seemed the mathematics might overwhelm the music, everything simplified into a single, elegant expression: E. MC2. The last notes hung in the air like a question answered. For a moment, no one moved. Then the hall erupted in applause. Mathematicians and musicians alike rose to their feet, recognizing that they had witnessed something extraordinary. A 13-year-old boy bridging worlds that had seemed unbridgeable. Liam stood, bowing the way Emily had taught him. His eyes found his parents in the front row, and his smile contained everything that hadn't been said, everything that didn't need to be said anymore. Later, at the reception, professors crowded around Liam, asking questions about his methods, his insights, his plans for future work. Jonathan watched from a distance, remembering how it felt to be the young prodigy everyone wanted to talk to. "Auntie, he handles it better than you did," Emily said softly, appearing at his side with 2 glasses of champagne. "He handles everything better than I did." Jonathan accepted a glass. "He got that from you. He got it from both of us." Emily nodded toward their son, who was explaining something with characteristic intensity to a group of fascinated mathematicians. "Your focus, my balance, your drive, my perspective, integration," Jonathan murmured. "Exactly." They watched as Liam excused himself from the professors and made his way to them. His tie was slightly loose now, his hair slightly mussed, but his eyes were bright with achievement. "Did you understand it?" he asked. "The equation at the end?" "Einstein's theory of relativity," Jonathan nodded. "Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared." "But why that equation?" Liam's smile turned thoughtful. "And because it shows that things we think are different, matter and energy, space and time, are actually connected, part of the same whole." He looked between his parents. "Like family." Emily pulled him into a hug, and Jonathan wrapped his arms around both of them. Around them, the reception continued, cameras flashed, and academics discussed the groundbreaking performance they had just witnessed. But in that moment, the only equation that mattered was the one they had solved together, the integration of 3 hearts into one family. On the first day of Columbia's summer program, Jonathan arrived early. The campus was quiet in the pre-dawn light, its historic buildings standing sentinel over empty pathways that would soon buzz with academic energy. He sat in his car, watching the eastern sky slowly brighten, remembering another morning 13 years ago when he'd made the wrong choice. His phone lit up with a text from Emily. "We're running late. Someone spent too long checking his equations." Jonathan smiled. Some things never changed, like Liam's perfectionism, a trait he'd inherited from both parents. Other things had changed so profoundly they seemed to belong to another lifetime. The corporate warrior who had once sacrificed everything for success now sat in a university parking lot at dawn, waiting to help his son move into summer housing. A knock on his window startled him from his thoughts. Liam stood there, grinning, already wearing his Columbia Summer Program lanyard. Emily pulled up behind them in her car, laden with boxes and bags. "You're early," Liam said as Jonathan stepped out. "So are you." "Couldn't sleep." "Too excited." Liam bounced on his toes, looking younger than his 13 years, despite his attempt at professional attire. "Did you bring it?" Jonathan reached into his car and pulled out an old, worn briefcase, the same one he'd carried during his own college days. "Your mother thought it was too old-fashioned, but it's perfect." Liam ran his fingers over the weathered leather. "Like a piece of history." "Speaking of history," Emily joined them, carrying Liam's laptop bag. "Guess what your father found in his office archives?" Jonathan pulled an envelope from his jacket. Inside was a yellowed newspaper clipping from 15 years ago, a photo of young Jonathan and Emily at a college mathematics competition. They were laughing about something, their hands intertwined, futures unlimited. "You guys look so young," Liam said, studying the photo. "Dad, your hair! Hey, that was fashionable back then." "No, it wasn't," Emily countered, but her eyes were soft with remembrance. They began unloading the cars, joining other families in the steady stream toward the dormitory. Jonathan noticed how Liam walked between them, unconsciously matching his pace to theirs, the three of them moving in natural synchronization. The dorm room was small, but bright, with a view of the mathematics building where Liam would spend his summer delving deeper into the intersection of music and numbers. As they unpacked, each item found its place. Emily's organizational skills, Jonathan's efficiency, and Liam's creative chaos somehow blending into a workable system. "Oh," Jonathan remembered suddenly, pulling a package from his briefcase. "This came to the office yesterday." Liam opened it carefully. Inside was a formal letter from Princeton, offering him a chance to develop his mathematical music theory into a full research project, with mentorship from both the mathematics and music departments. "They want to publish my paper," he whispered, awe in his voice. "They think my ideas could help other students understand advanced mathematics through musical patterns." "Of course they do," Emily said proudly. "You're breaking new ground, sweetheart. Just remember," Jonathan added, "no working on the paper until after your summer classes, one breakthrough at a time." Liam rolled his eyes, but he was smiling. "Says the man who runs a global company while revolutionizing corporate culture and learning to be a father." "He's got you there," Emily laughed. A bell chimed in the distance, the signal for summer students to gather for orientation. Liam looked at his parents, sudden uncertainty crossing his face. "What if I'm not ready?" he asked quietly. "What if I'm too young or not good enough or—" "Stop," Jonathan interrupted gently. He placed his hands on his son's shoulders, the gesture now familiar and natural. "You are exactly where you're supposed to be, and we are exactly where we're supposed to be, right here, supporting you. Always," Emily added, joining them. Liam hugged them both, holding on a moment longer than usual. When he stepped back, his eyes were bright but determined. "I should go," he said, gathering his orientation materials. At the door, he paused. "Dad, the board meeting next week." "Already rescheduled," Jonathan assured him. "I'll be here for your first presentation, front row." With embarrassing proud parent energy, Emily added. Like normal parents," Liam grinned, and then he was gone, joining the flow of students heading to orientation. Jonathan and Emily stood at the window, watching their son cross the quad. His walk had changed subtly in recent months, still carrying that familiar determination, but with a new confidence, a sense of knowing exactly who he was and where he belonged. "We did okay," Emily said softly, "despite everything." "He did okay," Jonathan corrected. "Or we just finally got out of his way and let him show us how." They walked back to their cars in comfortable silence, the morning sun now fully risen over Columbia's campus. Jonathan's phone buzzed with work messages. Emily had court preparations waiting, but neither rushed to leave. "Coffee?" he suggested, nodding toward the campus cafe where they had once spent countless hours studying. "I'd like that." As they walked, Jonathan thought about equations and variables, about music and mathematics, about all the ways life could surprise you when you finally learned which constants truly mattered. His empire still stood, perhaps stronger than ever, but now he understood that success wasn't measured in stock prices or board votes. It was measured in early morning car rides and late-night math problems, in piano recitals and proud parent moments, in the quiet triumph of a family finding its way home. Some equations, once solved, became constants you could build a life around. Jonathan Hayes had finally found his The End. That was a beautiful story, wasn't it? I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your collaboration is very important to me.